Hi guys, I'm David with MediaUnlock.net.
And I'm Kevin Angel with MediaUnlock.net.
And today we're going to be talking about the Crane 2 and a few of the other cranes that we've used. We bought the Crane 2 recently and have been using a lot for wedding videos, some of our Media Unlocked videos. We've had it for a little over a month now, and well, we're kind of obsessed with it. It has changed the way that we shoot. It has changed the way that we set up for shoots. And we're extremely happy with it at the $750 price point. Since the Ronin-s has come out, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a drop in the price point. I know when the Ronin-s first came out, it seemed like there was about a $150 drop, $650, but it seems to be back up to $750 for now. We hope to actually put it up against the Ronin-s here in the next month to see which one actually performs better and which one you should probably get. So I'm gonna let Kevin dive in a little bit onto his thoughts and what he thinks about the Crane.
Yeah, so the Crane 2 is an absolute phenomenal piece of equipment. It definitely has a ton of upgrades from the V2, which I was using previously, namely the tripod bottom mount, which is just absolutely huge. Yeah. Not having to buy a simple Manfrotto bottom, it just makes things a lot easier. The adjusting of the top gimbal without using the joystick is probably my second favorite feature. If you're using a slow tilt and you don't want to have to reset, a tilt up shot, you can simply just angle the lens down, which really makes life a lot easier and a lot faster. The motors are incredibly strong on this one. I can run my 6D Mark II with a 24-105, which is not a small lens, and the high sensitivity on the motors run it perfectly, whereas the two iterations before really struggle to keep that balance. The battery life is tremendous.
We get the full, and we did this actually one day. We set my Sony a7R III, or this might be the A3, and the 28mm f2 on there, which is a super light body and lens setup, super light. And Kevin's like, hey, we're just gonna leave the Crane on all day long. Just don't turn it off at all.
We set it up, what, at 10 a.m.?
Yeah, and it went, well, I guess we got about, what time did we get out of there? 11 p.m.?
So 13 hours.
We got 13 hours and it still had 2 battery. It's like a little less than half gone. So we were really impressed. The only time that it got turned off is when we had to take the camera off the body to switch out the battery. Outside of that, the Crane was on. And it was great because I have 2 or 3 cameras that I'm running depending on if it's a ceremony or if we were actually in the reception or we were just grabbing pictures of the bride or the groom, video. And so I would have 2 cameras and one on a monopod, one on the Crane. So I would have the monopod in one hand and the Crane in the other, which is really easy. It's really lightweight to pick up and use it on this setup. And so it made it really easy for me to get shots, even if I had the monopod in my hand, set the Crane down wherever I wanted as long as it was a flat surface, and then go monopod a shot. And I would just leave the Crane on, and then when I needed it again, I would drop the monopod, grab the Crane, or just have both in my hand. So thankfully, it's super lightweight with that setup, and it made it really easy. Now, we did find that you need to keep the motor on low for that setup. If we put it on medium or high, you would get some shake, and I think it was because the motors were trying to overcompensate for a super lightweight setup. So when Kevin uses his 24-105 on the Canon 6D Mark II with the battery grip, we did find that we needed the motors on high, that medium and low just wouldn't cut it. Yes. Now we did also find out if you are shooting on a heavier setup on high, we figured you get about 7 to 8 hours of straight shooting, which they did find that out, that the Crane did die about 7 or 8 hours into a wedding shoot, but they were using a much heavier setup than my Sony mirrorless with the 28mm f2, which is a super, super lightweight setup.
And it may not be that it was per se a heavier setup, it was that it was a very front heavy setup. We were using the Sony a7S II and then a 24-70 G Master, which is a very bulky lens, and it was more difficult to balance than we would have liked. So we think that the motors had to overcompensate the whole day, and then it cut the battery life in half. So that's something to think about. But if you have a lightweight camera, you are going to be able to roll for the entire day and not have a problem with just the single set of batteries that they give you.
Yeah, I mean, this really has changed the way we shoot. Previously, what we would use is these Glide Cam. The XR4000 is one that we really, really like. And this thing, I mean, it gets amazing shots. And now the plus side of having the glide cam over the crane is that, and we don't have a lot of problems with this if you actually have time to walk the right way with the crane, is that the crane can counterbalance and get really nice smooth shots, but as you're moving up and down, as you're walking like this, with the glide cam, you're able to angle it in a way that allows it to actually coincide with your movement. Where the crane, you might see a little bit of jerk, but you use, what is it, warp stabilizer?
Warp stabilizer, 22%. That's all you need.
Yeah, so the warp stabilizer fixes that if there's any of that in there, if you actually have to run or do that. But if you walk fairly slow with and you kind of walk on your heels and the balls of your feet, so you're not getting as much up and down movement, we find that the crane gets just unbelievably smooth footage. And if you do have to move in a way that you get some of that up and down movement in your crane shot, again, warp stabilizer at 22% seems to be the way to go. That's what Kevin does, and he fixes it completely. So the biggest thing, you know, versus the glide cam just takes so long to balance sometimes, especially if you're doing a whole setup. I mean, you have to go in and move these weights. Then you have to do all of your axis here, where the crane 2, it's so simple. It took me what, like less than 2 minutes to balance that.
2 minutes setup.
And I can do that with any of my bodies or lenses on the crane 2 versus the glide cam. If I'm changing body and lenses, like there's so much that needs to be changed. Now, if I was using the same, I guess, body and lens every single time, this would be pretty simple to set up. But the crane allows me to put any body or lens that it will handle up to the 7-pound payload. I can really balance it super, super quick. So the glide cam is great, but for what we use it for, we need run and gun, we need quick, we need smooth, and the crane hits most of those categories, hits all those categories faster and better than the glide cam, in my opinion.
Yeah. The only thing is, you know, sometimes with batteries, you know, batteries do die. So that is the one pro to having the glide cam, that is completely gravity fed. So there is going to be no batteries dying on the glide cam. Whereas with the cranes, you know, you might want to have extra batteries and you might want to do a battery swap, but with the 18-hour battery life, you know, chances are that's not going to happen. But like I said, if you're using a heavier setup, you want to be weary and you want to make sure that you are prepared for a full day shoot.
Right. And the crane's a lot more lightweight. The glide cam, you're going to get tired quick. Yes. Now, people that have been using the glide cam that predated the crane, that used it, like myself, for a very long time, and people that even, I mean, I've been doing glide cam probably for a couple of years now, so they're guys that have been doing it for like 10 years. And so they didn't have the option of the crane. A lot of those guys still gravitate towards the glide cam because it's just what they're used to, and they're still able to get the same shot as they can. I mean, both items can get the same exact shot. I just find that the crane makes it easier. I don't think the crane necessarily shoots any smoother than the glide cam if the glide cam's balanced properly and used the right way. I just think that the crane actually does it as a whole. I can get a nice smooth shot. I can balance it super quick. I can change my body. I can change my lens. Kevin did mention there is a battery issue, far as, you know, you get 18 hours, 7 to 18 hours of shooting, but you can always buy extra backup batteries and switch those out really quick. So again, if I had to hold a glide cam for 8 to 18 hours, then like I'd have massive muscles, I think, because I don't think anybody's holding glide cams for that many hours straight without some breaks.
And that's why they have the vests that they can create for those. But with this, you really don't need it. I mean, with how easy it is to set down as well. You know, you get your shot, you set it down, you take a break, you grab some water, you know, you're going to be recharged. It's not the most taxing piece of equipment in the world, which is really why we keep it in our bag. Right.
And we did find that the crane works best if you have a camera that does decent with autofocus. You know, trying to manual focus on a crane is a little bit more difficult. Now we do have a follow focus system here, which works well with Canon. But Kevin's so used to doing his manual focus and not using a follow focus that he kind of found that just using the Sony, because the Sony does a pretty decent autofocus job, we don't get a lot of searching, that we mostly just ran the Sony because of that. And then Kevin kind of stayed on a monopod for a lot of the weddings and manual focused.
Yeah, we've set up the focus ring a couple times now, and as nice as it is to be able to use the ring on the side of the body of the crane, it for me is just a little much. You know, like David was saying, chances are I'm going to be able to get autofocus to work with the crane. I don't really want to be focusing while I'm doing axis movement. It's really hard to nail, especially if you're doing it manually. Right. So have a nice autofocus, whether it's, the 70D, the 80D, the 60D Mark II, or any of the Sony line, and have the autofocus sensors enabled and just let that do the work. With the 6D Mark II, I can just touch on the screen where I want it to be in focus, and I can move forward towards it, and that square usually will stay in point, and that shot will be in focus, and that just makes life a lot easier. It requires you to not be messing with the lens, which does add a little bit of shake no matter what you're going to do, no matter what shot. And I would just recommend the autofocus regardless. I'm not a big fan of the USB focus system that plugs in. I just found it to be a little bit glitchy, but like I said, I really don't want to have the focus ring on the side. That's not something I use as much as other people. Rely on your autofocus, especially with the crane, and you will get good results.
Yeah, and the idea is that, like for us when we're shooting a wedding, I mean, we have tons of footage, so we're not going to use all the footage. If you're doing stuff where you have to get very specific shots, and you can do another take, but you're going to be using those shots, make sure that your autofocus is set where you want it to and that it tracks well. We didn't really have any problems. Again, it comes also down to certain lenses. I mean, I've got the 50mm on here just because I wanted to throw a lens on there. It does not do good with autofocus just in general. So the 28 does a much better job of staying in focus and not getting a lot of that searching. Other things that we found that were really nice with the crane, and that's with any of these cranes, is that we're able to, and we've got this set up on a monopod here. So, and I know you guys probably can't see the crane because it's probably out of frame, but you can see the bottom of this monopod. And we found that, the really cool thing is that we can set this up on a monopod, a tripod, and then like we were doing one shot where we were using the tripod, and I was able to just pull off quick release off the tripod really easy, and then start using the crane. So we needed the crane to be higher up off the ground for a specific shot, and then the second there was movement, I pulled it off the tripod and went right into moving and capturing that shot of the bride and groom leaving the ceremony right after they got married.
And the other thing you can do is use these mini Manfrotto tripods.
Yeah.
For the crane, the cranes before the Crane 2, and these work just as well. They aren't as widespread, but it's definitely a good solution because upon using my first couple cranes, we would have to lay them down throughout the day, and that's just not a good idea. You lose your balance, you have to reset it. When you can set it up and keep it like this and keep it running, it makes it a lot easier just to be run and gun with, rather than having to turn it on and off each time and worrying about if when you set it down it knocks some of the axes off. It's a lot easier. So definitely, if you are to use one of the cranes predating the Crane 2, get either a monopod or a mini tripod to set it on, because that makes life just so much easier.
Yes, definitely. So what are some of the pros and cons that you think? Because you've used the other cranes more than I have.
Yes.
I predominantly just use the Crane 2. What are some of your plus and minuses for each individual crane that we have? Because we've got 3 different cranes sitting here.
So the number one thing that I think has changed the most is the build and the joystick action of each one. They've just gotten a lot better throughout the progression of the cranes. The first joystick on the very first version 1 is very skittish. It's not very good. Although we don't use the joystick too much at all, you can definitely tell that there was an upgrade going from the V1 into the V2. They have added an extra battery life going into the V2, which were smaller batteries that lasted longer. And then now in the Crane 2, there is a much wider battery grip, which holds the much larger batteries. It holds obviously 18 hours of battery life. So that is the one thing. I think with the first crane, we were getting between 6 and 8 hours on a full charge. With the V2, I think we were getting around 12 hours. And then now 18 hours. So the battery life has definitely improved. With the new crane, we have the follow focus wheel. There is an added element to the LCD screen in the back, and it just holds a lot heavier of a load. Whereas with the first cranes, you could really struggle to get a bigger body. Like my 6D, it just didn't fit on there well. To tilt up, the eyepiece would catch the back, whereas there's a lot more room to move with the Crane 2. You're not getting the eyepiece hitting as much, so it holds a bigger, heavier camera, which might not be necessary for what you need. But as far as everything else is concerned, the big change, the big two changes that I've noted between the predated cranes and the newest one, and like I said this earlier, is you can adjust the angle of your y-axis manually, which is huge, especially if you're using a low tilt sensitivity. We'll get this turned on.
We'll actually show you what we're talking about.
Example here.
Yeah. So the really cool thing is,
so if you are to tilt down and get a shot, looking say down at an object, instead of having to hit the joystick up and cue the Jeopardy theme, wait for it to go back up to the top, we can simply just vamos and it's back, which is huge because if you are doing say a take walking up to a venue and you want to have a nice tilt up, and let's say somebody walks out of the front door and messes up your shot, well then you have to be walking back, you have to let it tilt all the way down while you just did that take. Instead you can just tilt it down, pop, you're back ready to get the shot, which adds to the run and gun nature of this beast. The other thing is the added tripod legs that they did not have with the previous versions. I think it's a no-brainer to have these included, but maybe they did not, so I definitely appreciate that these are in the case, ready to go. When I set my crane up, the legs are already on it. You can fold them in, and it actually makes the grip a lot better. We were adding a monopod to the cranes before, which added just a little bit of stability, and then obviously you can pop the legs out. Having that stand is crucial, so that you don't have to turn it off and rebalance it. But as far as the differences go, heavier payload on the newest one, has a lot more room for the bigger cameras. However, the younger cranes hold smaller mirrorless cameras with smaller lenses, absolutely perfect.
And they're a lot cheaper.
They're a lot cheaper. I mean, $300 cheaper. The motion is very similar. The app adjusts it just as well. And they do just a great job. Other than the quick release plate being Manfrotto, that is another change. These are still viable. I still use the V2. But the Crane 2 is great for more heavy-duty shoots.
And I may go with a smaller crane if I was just shooting my mirrorless with my lightweight lenses, but I do enough work where I have a heavier payload from time to time that I like having the Crane 2. And that's kind of the differences in like which one you want to get. It comes down to how heavy your payload's going to be on average. I mostly use a Sony with a lightweight lens, like the 28 f2. But if every once in a while I'll run the 16 to 35 or a 24 to 70, those are much heavier. Or we'll actually run one of Kevin's camera bodies, the Canon ones like the 60 Mark II, again heavier with the battery grip. So that we have found that the Crane 2 is kind of nice to have because it can do those heavier payloads when we need it, and it handles the smaller payloads as well. And then we get that added time of 18 hours and the tripod piece at the bottom. And then if we use the follow focus, we do have that option. We were extremely happy with the Crane. It does a great job of tracking. Pretty much we just leave it in the first mode. And let me just move this. And so the nice thing about it is we move, it moves with you like this. So, and then we can switch modes if we want. And then it will just stay however you want to position it. So if I want to position it like this, it will just stay in that position as I move. But it just does a great job of getting these smooth, amazing shots that we just absolutely love. And honestly, I don't know how I've been working as a videographer for as long as I have since this thing's been out and not had one of these. Like,
they're incredible.
Yeah, it really changed the way that we've shot weddings and that we've shot a lot of these other stuff. Even like specific shots that we need for media unlock for videos. Like,
yes, that's true.
It's
true.
This is going to stay in our kit, and we may end up picking a second one up because we use it so much, and sometimes we'll need two of them.
Yeah, and then that's the age of cinematography that we're in.
Yeah.
Every shot needs to have some type of movement, some type of parallax, and this gives it to you just in such a smooth manner. And it is just so much fun to use. I mean, you just can't not have a smile on your face when you're shooting using the Crane. I mean, every shot you look at is just so smooth, and then especially if you use a little bit of warp stabilizer at the end, it just really makes for these just beautiful tracking shots that, 15 years ago we were building dolly tracks and having these big carts to get these shots, and now it is a small handheld device that's in a little briefcase that you carry around, and it's just so much fun.
Some of the shots, I mean, literally some of the shots I'll do and I'm like, this looks beautiful. And like, I literally cannot wait to get back to my computer. So I'm sitting there like rewatching, like we're sitting there like taking turns rewatching shots that we're shooting throughout the wedding when we have some downtime. We're like, oh my God, like this is gonna be so amazing once we start editing this.
Yes.
So we are a big fan of the Crane 2. We do hope to eventually make a video, Crane 2 versus the Ronin-s. I think they're going to be very comparable. I don't know if one's going to necessarily be better than the other, but I think they're both going to give you exactly what you need. I still do think the Crane is probably going to drop in price to compete with the Ronin-s, or maybe even drop a little bit under the Ronin-s price eventually. You guys have made it this far. If you want to check out our newest video, it will be right here. If you want to check out the product, it will be down here. If you do happen to click on it and purchase it, it does give us a little bit of commission, and that helps me a lot keep making these videos. And of course, guys, right down below, go on and leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, follow along. We'll catch you next time.